All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, I've done a series of videos over the last couple of years in reference to Mr. Mike Tomlin, the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what I basically stated in most of those videos is that the brother is a great motivator, but I'm not quite sure if he has what it takes to lead the Pittsburgh Steelers when it comes to maturity. Because he seems like a frustrated football player. He seems like somebody who, even though he can lead men, he's a great leader of men. I'm not quite sure if he understands the importance of there being a partition between himself and the players. And I think that he can continue to put on that rah-rah, sis, boom, bah act as long as the vast majority of the players are younger. But if you pay very close attention, a lot of his protocols start to wear on the older players, because as you get older, you start to notice more things that need to be enacted in order for there to be a sense of order in your locker room, your organization, or what have you, that is not being done by a leader, no matter how charismatic he is. That's why you'll see players like a James Harrison or even a big Ben Roethlisberger, and I'm not really that eager to cite him because we all know that Big Ben has a bevy of issues himself. But most of the veterans on the Pittsburgh Steelers, they tend to make little sniping comments about Coach T because they understand that he leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to organizational skills. He does not hold a lot of these players accountable. Why is that? Because I think that he still thinks that he's one of the players. And this is why, to me, the Pittsburgh Steelers have not won as much as they probably should have won, because for all intents and purposes, they have the most stacked roster in the NFL every year, especially on offense. I mean, even without the best all-around running back in the NFL in Le'Veon Bell, they still have probably a top 5 offense in the league. But they're 7-5-1. Why are they losing some of these games that they should not be losing? Why did they lose to the Denver Broncos? Why did they give up a 14-point lead at home to the LA Chargers? These are things that you're not going to see from a Bill Belichick team. And people might say, well, Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time. I get that. But he is coaching in the modern NFL. So he is a rival. He is a contemporary of Coach Mike Tomlin. So Mike Tomlin has to raise his game in order to defeat him. And I just don't think that he's done that. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in on whether or not Coach Mike Tomlin should be fired.
It's time the Steelers consider firing Mike Tomlin. That's the sentiment of a Mark Madden column out this week in the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, highlighting Tomlin's unpreparedness for Sunday's game, the multiple special teams penalties, and poor clock management. Stephen A., what do you make of Tomlin being on the hot seat?
Let me say this very quickly. It's very difficult to put Mike Tomlin on the hot seat when we look at the level of success that he's had. But certain people might say the reason why he's had that level of success is because he's been fortunate enough to have a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. And the Pittsburgh Steelers scouting team has done a phenomenal job of drafting. We can all say that, but we've also seen coaches who've had great talent on their team and have done nothing with it. Look at Jeff Fisher of the St. Louis Rams, later on the LA Rams. When he was coaching that team, they were terrible. They make one strategic change to Sean McVay, and all of a sudden, they become an 11-5 team in 1 year. So I'm not going to take all the credit away from Tomlin, but I will say this, he's on the clock. I think that the Rooneys are going to let Tomlin stay on at the very least until Ben Roethlisberger retires. And once Big Ben is gone, they're going to evaluate him based off of his ability or inability to groom the new quarterback that they bring onto the team.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm offended by it. I'm offended by this conversation. And I'm going to tell America why. Let me tell y'all something. All of y'all
You go, girl.
out there that's calling for Mike Tomlin, y'all could kiss off. I don't want to hear anything about this man.
You could say kiss off on TV?
I want Marvin Lewis fired first. Let's get that out of the way. Oh, by the way, let's go down the list because, Max, I make sure to look up the list because I want to compile a couple of things for you. Mike Tomlin right now is 123-65 as a head coach. He's won 65% of his games. Okay.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, look, the question is not whether or not Mike Tomlin has been successful. The issue is that they're trying to evaluate Mike Tomlin in light of the amount of copious talent that he has on the team. So there is a conundrum there when we're trying to evaluate Tomlin, because I think that the overall sentiment is, how great a coach is Mike Tomlin in concert with the amount of talent that he has? That's why I state that in order to properly evaluate him, they're pretty much going to have to wait until Roethlisberger's gone.
Let me start. He's been to one Super Bowl. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's got a Super Bowl championship. He's been to a couple of AFC championship games. He's won the division 6 times. He's got 8 playoff berths. This is Mike Tomlin, okay? This is the guy that we're talking about getting rid of. But Marvin Lewis still has a job. He's never won a playoff game. He's been a head coach since 2003. Jason Garrett.
Well, come on, Stephen A. Smith. Let's be for real. We know why Marvin Lewis still has his job. Marvin Lewis still has his job because he's basically able to take whoever the Cincinnati Bengals draft and develop them very, very well. And a lot of people might not understand this. They might be like, wow, how come Marvin Lewis still has a job? He's had no success in the playoffs. You know who Marvin Lewis is, brothers? Marvin Lewis is like that big, fat, ugly, unattractive chick that has held down your loser homeboy for 15 years. You're like, damn, why is Tony with that broad for? And then you go to their house and the house is spick and span, perfectly clean. The broad is cooking 3-course meals and all that other stuff. And you're like, wow, they really have found one another. They've helped one another out. Because my homeboy is a loser, and there's probably not that many men who would have been willing to be with her. But they fit well together. Marvin Lewis fits very well with the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. And like they say, sometimes, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The owner of the Bengals might say to himself, I can't get a coach better than Marvin Lewis. There's not going to be a better coach who's going to be as willing to be here as Marvin Lewis is.
Garrett still has his job in Dallas. Been there since 2010. He's got 1 playoff victory, or actually 2 playoff. Actually, yes, 1 playoff victory to show for his resume since 2010. We've got, who else do we have on the?
Right, but Jason Garrett ain't going anywhere. Okay, so don't even ask about Jason Garrett. Jason Garrett clearly has something on Jerry Jones, or they're brothers in some type of Luciferian fraternity somewhere. That's the reason why Jason Garrett still has his job. I mean, allegedly.
On this list, because let me look. Ron Rivera, he went to a Super Bowl, didn't win the Super Bowl championship, okay, but he still got his job. I'm sorry, John Harbaugh for the Baltimore Ravens, who I like and I think should keep his job, and I hope that he does. He's got a Super Bowl championship, but he's missed the playoffs a few times. He certainly hasn't had the same level of success that Mike Tomlin has had.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, John Harbaugh is probably the wrong name to bring up, because prior to John Harbaugh deciding to replace Joe Flacco with Lamar Jackson, he was considered as someone who was on the hot seat as well.
Okay, so we look at all of those different things. I'll even throw Sean Payton into the equation because you've had the great Drew Brees.
Why the hell would you throw Sean Payton into the equation, Stephen A. Smith? Sean Payton is viewed as an offensive genius. And I'll say this about Sean Payton. He's had a bevy of 8-8 and 7-9 seasons in recent years. But he's viewed as an offensive genius. And he's also somebody who will be inextricably linked not only with Drew Brees, but also with the city of New Orleans. A city, a team, and a franchise that pretty much had no success until he got there. We can't say that about Mike Tomlin.
Brees is your quarterback, and a few times you've missed the playoffs, for crying out loud. I don't want to hear anything about Mike Tomlin. I understand this has not been a good year. I understand with the talent that he has, as far as I'm concerned, over the last 3 weeks, they have underachieved. It's been a disappointment. I'm sick and tired of talking about that damn secondary. They need to fix it, and he's got a defensive background, which means that, you know what, you need to prioritize that defense playing better, which they did compared to what they were doing early in the season when they were so awful. But at the end of
There's only so much defense that you can tweak nowadays, Stephen A. Smith. In the NFL and the NBA, it's very obvious. They do not want the defense to have a real impact on the game, at least not in the regular season.
End of the day, I don't give a damn if the Steelers miss the playoffs. I don't give a damn if the Steelers don't make the playoffs and we're sitting there and they lose the rest of their games and they end this season on a 6-game losing streak. That erases over a decade of productivity, the likes that we have not seen outside of Bill Belichick.
Right, but we know that Coach Mike Tomlin is not going to be fired. The Roonies are not going to fire Mike Tomlin at the end of this season. I think that they would have to lose their next 3 games for them to even consider it.
I'm sorry, I'm not. Listen, if you want to talk about getting rid of Mike Tomlin, do me a favor. Get rid of about 5 or 6 other NFL head coaches first. Then come talk to me.
The idea of Mike Tomlin being on the hot seat is totally absurd. I won't even talk about who should be fired before him, because he does not belong in the category of guys who should be even looked at.
Right.
Now, if you want to say he's imperfect, and I brought up, hey, I noticed that he had a linebacker on a wideout toward the end of the game. It seemed to be a mistake. Keenan Allen, of all people. And I looked up Warren Sharp. You know, he does analytics on Twitter. I've mentioned him a bunch of times. I wanted to see what he had to say about it. Sure enough, he was tweeting all about it. this is something Tomlin does. This is a huge mistake. This is why they can't get past the Patriots. One of the reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, Tomlin makes some X's and O's mistakes strategically.
Well, strategic errors like that are the biggest difference in the world when you're going up against somebody like a Belichick. They just are. Or any other great coach, because to be quite frank with you, a decision like that will cost them in a playoff matchup against a team like the LA Chargers, like the Kansas City Chiefs, etc., who are going to see mismatches like that and take advantage right away.
So you need to get rid of them because people are too focused on what someone isn't instead of what they are.
Agreed. Perfect is the enemy of good. I mean, people right now are sitting at home by themselves at 55 years old because they decided that the person that they were with at 22 wasn't right for them, quote unquote, wasn't perfect for them, even though that person was good to them and respected them and understood how to fulfill their role with that person. I'm talking about male or female. And now that person, 55 years old, sitting up in the house or in their apartment by themselves looking stupid.
You could have a third baseman who's great in every way. He doesn't charge the bunt well, or a catcher who allows pass balls, but in every other way is great, right? And people will harp on a basketball player, very effective. He can't go left. So what? All you're saying is that they're
That's like the people who talk about Dominique Wilkins didn't have a left hand, or Jerry West.
Imperfect. The perfect is the enemy of the good.
Hey, you took my line. And no, I did not watch this segment before I made this video.
In this case, the great. Mike Tomlin is a great coach. How great is he? He gets guys to play for him. I didn't just think the Steelers would make the playoffs this year.
I'm not quite sure that Mike Tomlin is a great coach, but I don't have enough data to say that he's not a great coach because they've had the amount of success that you would expect from a team with that caliber or that level of talent on the squad. The only way to truly determine how great or not great a coach is after the talent starts to dissipate, after certain prominent players start to retire or maybe leave to go to other teams, and see how he's able to patch things up. That's the only way that we're ever going to really know for sure.
I thought they were a flawed team, especially on defense. He got the defense playing well. That was with Le'Veon Bell. I thought they were overrated.
Not having Le'Veon and not having James Conner.
Right, but I don't want to hear about the Le'Veon stuff because a couple of weeks ago you guys were trying to make James Conner out to be the modern day Earl Campbell. Supposedly the Steelers did not need Le'Veon anymore. We know that was not the case. And the way that Mike Tomlin allowed his team to disrespect Le'Veon so openly shows me that was a code red that came from the top from him. That he had no respect for Le'Veon, and therefore the team was allowed to not respect Le'Veon.
Part of the reason people think Pittsburgh should win so much because they have such a great coach. They're always in contention.
Yeah.
And so people assume...
Well, part of the reason why people believe that Pittsburgh should win more is not just because it's perceived that they have a great coach. It's perceived that they have a top 5 quarterback, which is debatable. I think that Roethlisberger is overrated at this point in his career. I think that he might not even be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL right now. I put him top 10. But Roethlisberger has become one of these quarterbacks that throws for 400 yards and throws 3 picks, or 350 yards and 4 picks and 1 interception, but that 1 interception comes at a crucial moment. He's starting to become one of these guys. And he's really been that guy for like the last 3 years or so. But the perception is that they have a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, that they have the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, and that prior to this season, they had the number 1 running back in the NFL. So when you have those 3 things in tandem, it's kind of difficult for people to not believe that you should be better than what you are if you're not at least making Super Bowl appearances.
Assume they're better than they are. Listen to these win-loss records since Tomlin took over the team. 10-6, 12-4, 9-7, 12-4, 12-4. Had a couple of 8-8 seasons. 11-5, 10-6, 11-5, 13-3, and he's won a Super Bowl. Now he's 7-5. If you mean to tell me that you can't live with, at worst, every 4 or 5 years, an 8-8 season, when you are basically making the playoffs every year, and you have a problem with that coach, then in fact you have a problem.
Well, here's the issue with that, Max Kellerman. 8-8 is not going to get you the Super Bowl. And when you have Big Ben Roethlisberger as your QB, it's perceived that you have a Super Bowl quarterback. Now, I'm sure that one of those 8-8 seasons was the year that Big Ben was out for the majority of the year and Mike Vick was getting starts at quarterback. So, of course, I give Coach T a mulligan for that. but you should have more than one Super Bowl victory with Big Ben Roethlisberger as your QB. At the very least, there should be 4 or 5 AFC Championship matchups between himself and Brady. We don't have that. Many of Tom Brady's AFC Championship game matchups were against Joe Flacco. I think that he probably has as many against Joe Flacco as he does against Big Ben. He's had a couple in the last few years against Peyton Manning as well as a Denver Bronco. So I think that's really the issue. Remember, Pittsburgh lost to Tim Tebow in Denver. That just can't happen.
By the way, good, Pittsburgh, fire Mike Tomlin. New York Football Giants, hire Mike Tomlin.
Well, here's the deal.
I'm not quite sure if you want that, Max Kellerman. Can you imagine Coach Mike Tomlin trying to preside over Odell Beckham? I'm not quite sure how well that's going to turn out.
This is one of the reasons why sometimes I'm considered a polarizing figure, because I'm going to say things that other people don't say. I ain't going to give a damn about it.
Well, let's be for real, Stephen A. Smith. The main reason why you're considered a quote-unquote polarizing figure is, yes, because you're a so-called black man on TV who's filled with bombast. But oftentimes you say idiotic things. That's what creates that air of contention around you, or so-called quote-unquote controversy.
This man is a black man. You know, you got a whole bunch of people, or a bunch of white coaches, that if they were doing what he did, they wouldn't be saying anything. Sean Payton missed the playoffs 3 straight years before the Saints made the playoffs last year.
Stephen A. Smith, you're absolutely correct, brother. But we already know that. The so-called preferential treatment for quote-unquote white coaches, or how they're viewed, not even just Caucasian coaches, but also Caucasian quarterbacks, that's not a news flash. So when you say things like that, that's not really anything that's revelatory. At the end of the day, as I've already stated, you have to understand something. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a franchise that has an exalted history going back to the early 70s. I mean, when did the Immaculate Reception take place? 72? Ever since then, they've been in contention for championships, for the most part. They had a lull from the mid-80s through the mid-90s, but once they got Bill Cowher, they were in contention to win championships every year since then. Ever since Bill Cowher came on, and then Mike Tomlin replaced him. And when you had Chuck Noll from the early 70s all the way through the early 80s, they were in contention. So when you're talking about the New Orleans Saints, you're talking about a team that was viewed as being at the lowest of the lowest levels in the NFL until Sean Payton came on with Drew Brees. So he has far more equity with that franchise than it would be perceived Mike Tomlin would have with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But all in all, I don't think that Tomlin's going to get fired anyway, because the Rooney's went out of their way to hire him and give him a chance. So they want to always make sure that they see their investment to its fruition.
I didn't hear anybody talk about him needing to be gone. How many times I bring up Jason Garrett? Well,
actually, I do remember hearing some things about Sean Payton maybe needing to leave New Orleans and possibly going to Dallas or one of these other franchises. I remember hearing something about that. But once again, I'm not trying to dispute your point. Your point is relevant, but I just think that you have to, when you're going to put two people in juxtaposition with one another, you also have to be able to properly evaluate the overall air around their franchise. When we talk about Jason Garrett, come on. That's something totally different. And people have been talking about Jason Garrett being fired for a while now. It's just that Jerry Jones is not going to fire him because you want him to be fired. Jerry Jones is going to do whatever the hell he wants to do.
But we allude to the relationship between him and his stepdaddy and Jerry Jones. It's no problem. You win 65% of your games. You have never had a losing record in your career as a head coach, and we're talking about you being gone? That is ridiculous. And it highlights and illuminates a double standard that I do not appreciate. No. And I can say that because...
Right, but Stephen A. Smith, is that purely a racial double standard in this case? Or is that also going into what is expected of you based off of the talent that you have? Because I actually think that we've heard far less about Mike Tomlin being let go than we possibly could have. Because many people might feel like, well, I don't want to say it because I'm going to be accused of being a racist. Other than Terry Bradshaw, I'm not sure if I've heard anybody say that Mike Tomlin needs to be let go. I've heard Colin Cowherd every once in a while say that the Steelers are not quote-unquote buttoned up like they should be, but he's not the only one saying that. Many of the Pittsburgh Steelers players say that, both black and white. I just think that Stephen A. Smith oftentimes is very awkward when he tries to take the racial angle because, for the most part, he does it in a very frivolous way. He does it in a way that lacks depth and that he really cannot expound on. And that's why he oftentimes ends up making an ass of himself when he tries to go the racial angle, which is always a pertinent angle. But when he tries to go there, it's normally something that's baseless. Because Tomlin has not been somebody who's been really put under the microscope in regards to his coaching and him possibly being let go. He's been put under far less scrutiny than Jason Garrett. He's been put under far less scrutiny than the coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. And many of these coaches. I mean, John Gruden's been put under far more scrutiny right now, and people will say, well, he deserves to be because the Raiders have not been as successful. But John Gruden's also a coach who's made 2 separate Super Bowl appearances with 2 separate teams. Now you'll say, well, wait a minute. When he coached Tampa Bay, that was Tony Dungy's team. All that's well and good. But at least he got the team to the Super Bowl and they won the championship. They never even got there with Tony Dungy. So, I mean, it is what it is. And he also got there with the Raiders. So when we start talking about how certain people are being scrutinized and for what reason, I think that Tomlin should keep his job. But he's somebody that you do have to watch because there are certain little idiosyncrasies that you have to have in order to be a consistent championship head coach that Belichick has that Tomlin just does not have. And for all intents and purposes, Belichick is his competition. I'm going to say it again. Once again, Belichick is his competition. He's not Vince Lombardi. He's not a coach that was around 60 years ago. Belichick is a contemporary of his. So if he's going to beat Belichick, he has to figure out what little wrinkles he needs to iron out. And him having his team buttoned up is definitely one of them.
Who calls for Marvin Lewis to be gone more than me?
Pittsburgh is an organization that values stability. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin. I don't think Mike Tomlin's going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. At least not until Big Ben is gone and they have the opportunity to properly evaluate him.
But the idea that he's not with it, I mentioned some flaw he has. Pittsburgh, he talked about when he got the job, run the ball, stop the run. Pittsburgh Steelers. I was like, that's right. But what happened? As the league changed, he was out in front of the curve. He had a spread out offense. He was playing modern football offense and kind of neglected the defense a little bit because that's where the resources were going.
Well, also remember, he also happened to have Bruce Arians as his offensive coordinator, if I remember correctly. And then he had Todd Haley. So it's not like he was the person who said, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. He had great offensive coordinators who understood how to convert their style of offense to a more wide open spread offense.
It's not as though Mike Tomlin can't change with the times. Remember, I pointed out coaches where I'm like, the game changed and you didn't change. Bill Belichick changed. Andy Reid changed. Truly great coaches. So did Mike Tomlin. He's a great coach.
They've had 3 coaches in 50 years.
Molly, one last point. Max Kellerman, it's a rhetorical question. Molly, it's a rhetorical question because you know your football. Bill Cowher had 2 losing seasons in Pittsburgh. Bill Cowher lost less of a percentage of his games in Pittsburgh than Mike Tomlin did. Bill Cowher won a Super Bowl and lost the Super Bowl. Well, we hear anything about Bill Cowher being on a hot seat? I don't recall.
That's why.
Right, but Steve, when we talk about Bill Cowher, we're going back 23, 25 years. At the end of the day, Bill Cowher's the coach that brought the Steelers back from the doldrums. So it's difficult to compare a coach who elevated the team to a coach who's maintained the level of the team. I mean, let's be for real. Mike Tomlin still is acting as the steward of the ship that Bill Cowher brought from the bottom of the ocean. He really is. Certain people might not like that, but that is the case. Because Roethlisberger was drafted while Bill Cowher was the coach of the team, not Mike Tomlin. Beyond that, when we go throughout the 1990s, the Pittsburgh Steelers never had a great quarterback. They had guys like Neil O'Donnell and Cordell Stewart, so on and so forth. So when you have that great quarterback, that does a lot to stabilize your seasons.
I don't recall.
Not going anywhere.
I don't recall that. Are you talking to a lifelong Steelers fan here? I don't recall.
It's just a bad
I don't recall. And oh, by the way, Ron Rivera, as we speak, is in the midst of a 5-game losing streak. But we talking about Mike Tomlin.
They got rid of some coordinators that could potentially.
Riverboat Ron.
I like.
Well, we've heard about Ron Rivera possibly being fired before also. And maybe he does need to go. But at the end of the day, Cam Newton, man. Cam Newton is that, and I say this all the time, Cam Newton is that chick who always gives you a hard time and, it's like, you know what, it's time for us to go our separate ways. And then she comes to your door with just a trench coat on and some red pumps and she butt naked underneath all that. That's Cam Newton, man. Every time you're ready to give up on Cam, he goes out and has a 400-yard passing game and he's throwing bullets all across the field. And then you start to say to yourself, okay, maybe Cam is finally going to show what, what he's supposed to be, and then he starts just throwing errant passes everywhere.
All right, let's keep it moving, guys.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see what happens with Coach T in the aftermath of Ben Roethlisberger's retirement whenever that comes. So peace.